My name is Sister Margaret Donnelly, and what I'm about to tell you happened on March 14, 2007. I've been a Catholic nun for most of my life, years spent behind convent walls, far from the noise of the outside world. People often imagine that such a life is filled with peace, that it's serene, pure, untouched by doubt. But the truth is, even in the quietest places, the soul can wander. I didn't lose faith, not exactly, but something inside me had gone quiet, and I didn't even realize how far I had drifted. Every day looked the same. I rose before sunrise, prayed the liturgy of the hours, tended the garden, taught catechism to the neighborhood children, and helped in the kitchen. On the surface, it was a life of obedience and service. But deep down I began to wonder, was I truly close to God or just surrounded by things that reminded me of Him? I never said it out loud. I never even wrote it in my journal. But it was there, a silent ache. Lord, do I really know you? Then came that cold March morning. I remember the sky was gray, and the halls of the convent were colder than usual. I was lighting candles in the chapel, preparing for morning prayer like I had done hundreds of times before. That's when it hit me, this crushing pressure in my chest, like someone had grabbed my heart and wouldn't let go. Fell to the floor. I remember hearing the sisters cry out, calling my name. Then silence, and after that nothing felt real anymore. But I didn't wake up in a hospital bed. I didn't see the faces of the other sisters or hear any machines. Instead, I opened my eyes and found myself in what I can only describe as another world. It was like standing in a church, but the walls were made of light, not stone. Everything shimmered, colors I had never seen before, sounds that weren't made by instruments but still felt like music. The very air felt alive, as if it was breathing with me or maybe through me. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I was in awe. And then I heard it, a voice. Not from above me or around me, but within me. It was soft and strong at the same time, and it said my name. Margaret. The moment I heard it, I dropped to my knees. Not because I was scared, but because I felt something holy, something so real it broke me open. I couldn't see where the voice came from at first, but I could feel it. Pure love and power, all at once. And then He appeared. It was Jesus. I don't know how else to say it. Not a picture or a vision or a dream, but Him. He stood before me in light that seemed alive, brighter than the sun but not blinding. I can still see them. They held everything: mercy, fire, truth, eternity. I couldn't look away. In that moment I felt like a little girl again, completely known, completely loved, and completely undone. I wanted to speak. I wanted to explain myself, to tell Him about all the years I'd spent serving, all the prayers I had whispered, the fasting, the obedience. But before I could say a word, He asked me a question. Just one question that hit me harder than anything I've ever heard. You have served my house, but did you truly seek my face? I couldn't answer. I couldn't even breathe, because deep down I knew the answer. I had been busy for God, but not always close to Him. I had followed the rules, kept the structure, honored the traditions, but somewhere along the way I stopped truly chasing His presence. My heart broke as I realized it. The tears came fast, not out of guilt, but from a kind of love that strips you bare and still holds you close. I wept in front of Him. I didn't feel condemned, I felt seen. And that kind of seeing changes everything. Jesus didn't speak right away. He just looked at me with those eyes that seemed to hold galaxies. And in that silence, I felt everything. Every moment I had gone through the motions, every prayer I had whispered without really meaning it, every time I smiled at the sisters while my spirit was dry. It all came rushing up like a flood. But instead of shame, I felt this overwhelming pull to draw closer to Him. Like He wasn't showing me my emptiness to hurt me. He was doing it to heal me. Then he reached out his hand and said, "Come." The moment I touched him, something happened. It was like every hidden thing in me was brought into the light, not in a punishing way, but in a freeing way. I could feel years of heaviness lifting. The fear, the doubt, the silence I had carried in my soul, they were all laid bare in his presence, and he loved me through every single piece of it. I wasn't just being forgiven, I was being made new. As he held my hand, the place around us started to change. It was like a veil had been pulled back, and we stepped into something deeper. I didn't know where he was taking me, but I trusted him. I felt no fear, only this awe that kept growing. We moved, though I didn't walk. It was like being drawn forward by light itself. I couldn't tell if I was still in a body or just spirit, but I knew I was alive in a way I had never been before. And then I saw it. A city made of worship, not of buildings but of sound and light and praise. Pulsed with life. Every corner of it was filled with songs I didn't know, yet I somehow understood. There were no instruments, yet the music felt fuller than any choir I'd ever heard. Angels moved in harmony, their wings like flames, their movements like dances of purpose. And at the center of it all, there was a throne, not a chair, not even something I could fully describe. It was like power and mercy and justice and beauty, all colliding in one place. It was the throne of the Father. I couldn't look at it for long. The closer we got, the more I felt my knees go weak. Not because I was afraid, but because I could feel the weight of glory, real, tangible holiness pressing against my soul. It was like the very air worshipped him. Every breath, every sound, every color pointed to the one who sat on that throne. I knew without being told that this was the presence of God the Father. And still Jesus held my hand. He didn't rush me. He let me feel it. He let me tremble. But then everything shifted again. The music faded. The light dimmed, not into darkness, but into something heavier. We were no longer in the city. We were somewhere else, a place I didn't have words for. It wasn't heaven, but it wasn't hell either. Felt like waiting. I could feel sorrow in the air, deep and quiet and real. Jesus looked at me, and his voice was soft when he spoke. Many pass into death unaware. They lived religious lives, but their hearts were far from me. Others never heard my name but searched for truth with sincere hearts. This is not their home, but mercy meets them here. I saw people, souls really, some kneeling, some weeping, some standing still in silence. There was no screaming, no torment, just a deep awareness of truth. It was as if they were being shown their lives all at once. Every moment, every motive, every time they ignored that quiet nudge of the Spirit. It was all laid bare. Some of them looked like they had been very devout in life. People who wore crosses, maybe even worked in ministry. But here they realized they had only known about Jesus, not known him personally. And the pain on their faces wasn't fear. It was regret. I wept watching them. My understanding of salvation, of mercy, of eternity, it was so small compared to what I was seeing. I thought holiness was silence and habit, but I had ignored the noise in my own soul. Jesus didn't shame them. He didn't turn away. He waited with them. He gave them space to see clearly. But he also made it known. This was not the end. This was the space between decisions, between revelation and response. It was mercy, but mercy has its moment. Then Jesus brought me to one more place. And this one I still struggle to talk about. It wasn't like the others. There was no music, no warmth, no sound of worship. It was empty. Not in a peaceful way, but in a way that chilled my spirit. There was no light, not even shadows. Just absence. The absence of God. And I knew instantly. This was the place of separation. The place where souls go when they've spent their lives turning away from Him. I didn't see fire or screaming like I'd always imagined. What I saw was worse. Souls wandering alone, trembling, confused, some whispering to themselves. I heard things like, "I thought I had more time," and "No one ever told me He was real." The sorrow wasn't just around them, it was inside them. It was like every selfish decision, every rejected invitation, every moment of pride was echoing in their minds over and over. And the worst part, they were still loved by God. Jesus looked at them and He cried, real tears. He said something I'll never forget. "I died for them too. But love cannot force itself." I could feel it, the ache in His heart. These were souls He longed to save. But He wouldn't violate their choices. I wanted to scream at them. Call out to Him. It's not too late. But it was. Not because Jesus rejected them, but because they had spent their entire lives rejecting Him. My heart broke. I fell to my knees again. And in that moment, everything around us began to fade. The veil closed. We were back in the light. Jesus turned to me. His expression was firm but full of love. "Margaret," He said, "you have known discipline, but now you have known truth. It is not enough to serve me with your hands. I want your heart, and I want you to speak boldly, because too many believe they are safe, but their hearts are far from me." I couldn't stop the tears. I whispered, "I'm not worthy." And He answered, "I do not call the worthy, call the willing, and I make them holy." Then He touched my forehead. The moment His hand touched my forehead, everything rushed backwards. Light, memory, pain. It all pulled away like a tide. And suddenly, I was gasping for air in the convent infirmary. I had returned. My body felt heavy, like it didn't belong to me anymore. The room was dim, the faces around me blurred by tears and shock. I heard someone cry out, "She's awake!" It was Sister and one of our younger novices. Her hands were shaking as she held mine. She whispered, "We thought you were gone." The doctors couldn't explain it. My heart had stopped for over 9 minutes. They called it a miracle, a fluke, a medical anomaly. But I knew better. I hadn't just died. I had stood before the King of Heaven. I had walked through the realms of eternity. And He sent me back, not just to live but to speak, to wake up His church, to warn the lukewarm, to comfort the doubters, to tell the world that Jesus is real and He's coming soon. At first, I didn't know what to do. I was quiet, still overwhelmed. But the fire in my soul wouldn't let me stay silent for long. One morning, I asked to speak during our chapel service. The sisters sat quietly as I began. I told them everything: the light, the city, place of waiting, the separation, the sorrow in Jesus' eyes. I told them how easy it is to serve God with our hands while our hearts drift away. Some of the sisters wept. Others stared in stunned silence. But something shifted in that room. We weren't just nuns anymore. We were women awakening. That same week, I was invited to share my story at a youth group in a nearby parish. I didn't think I had anything to offer teenagers with their phones and distractions and noise. But when I stood before them and said, "I died and I met Jesus," the room went still. For the next 45 minutes, I poured out my soul. I told them everything. And by the end, they weren't slouching or smirking. They were crying. 8 of them gave their lives to Christ that night. Right there on a cold church floor, eternity came close. That night was just the beginning. Word started to spread about the nun who had died and come back with a message from Jesus. I wasn't looking for attention. I didn't want fame. But I couldn't ignore what God was doing. Invitations came from parishes, youth events, Even small churches I'd never heard of. Sometimes I spoke to 5 people. Other times it was hundreds. But I didn't change the message. Jesus is real. Heaven is real. Hell is real. And eternity isn't something we can afford to ignore. Of course, not everyone was happy about it. Some priests politely warned me to tone it down. One bishop even asked me to stop sharing the parts about judgment and separation, saying it might scare people. And yes, I understood. Fear doesn't save anyone, but truth does. And I had seen the truth. I had stood in the presence of Jesus. I had seen the eyes of the lost. And I knew I would rather be rejected by man than be silent before God. The resistance wasn't just from within the church. I started having strange things happen at night. I'd wake up with a heavy pressure on my chest, unable to breathe, unable to move. I knew it was spiritual. One night, I could feel something dark in the corner of my room, watching me, hating me. I whispered, "Jesus," and instantly the darkness fled. After that, I anointed my room with oil and declared it a place of His presence. The attacks didn't stop right away, but I wasn't afraid anymore, because I had seen the King. And once you've seen Him, fear loses its grip. Then came the night that changed everything again. I was invited to speak in a city with a long history of spiritual darkness, witchcraft, New Age, occult practices. As soon as I stepped into the building, I could feel it. The air was heavy, like something unseen was pressing down. I began to speak, telling the story just like I always did. Halfway through, a girl in the back suddenly screamed and collapsed. Her friends were terrified, crying, unsure what to do. I walked straight to her, knelt beside her and whispered, "Jesus Christ is Lord." Her body jolted. I said it again louder. She shrieked, and then she was still. Moments later she opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She looked right at me and whispered, "He saved me." I held her hand as she wept, and we prayed right there on the floor. That night a fire broke out, not the kind that burns buildings, but the kind that burns inside hearts. Kids were crying, teachers were repenting, and even some of the parents who had come to pick up their children ended up staying to hear the rest of the message. It wasn't about me. Never was. It was about Jesus. His presence had filled that place, and no one who was there walked away the same. But that moment came with a price. The next day, the school issued a statement calling it an unsanctioned religious event. Parents complained. Leaders in the church began distancing themselves from me again. I was told to be careful, to avoid being too emotional or too dramatic. Some accused me of lying. Others said I must have hallucinated the whole thing. Few even called me a fanatic. And maybe I would have believed them if I hadn't seen what I saw. If I hadn't stood in that light. If I hadn't felt Jesus's hand in mine. But I had. Not long after, I received a letter from the Vatican. First, I thought it was another warning. But when I opened it, I saw that a bishop, one who had previously criticized me, wanted to meet in person. He said, "We need to understand what's happening." I traveled to Rome in silence, praying the entire flight. When I arrived, they led me through back corridors into a quiet, hidden room. There were no cameras, no crowds, just 5 men in robes, sitting behind a table with folded hands and tired eyes. They asked me to share my story again, every detail. So I did. I told them about the light, the throne, place of waiting, the separation, the girl who screamed, the students who wept, the nights I couldn't breathe. And when I was finished, one of the oldest cardinals stood up. His hands were trembling. "I saw him too," he said, "years ago when I was young. But I buried it." Tears filled his eyes. Thank you for reminding me who I serve." In that moment I knew this wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about waking up the church. They didn't make any public statements after that meeting. There were no headlines or declarations of support. But they also didn't silence me. One of the cardinals gave me a quiet blessing before I left and whispered, "Keep going. The time is short." I walked out of that building in Rome with a fire in my chest I hadn't felt since I was a young novice. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even confidence. It was purpose. I knew what I had seen. I knew who had sent me. And I knew that no matter the cost, I had to keep telling the truth. After that, the doors began to open faster than I could knock. Churches in different countries invited me. Small villages in South America. Underground gatherings in Eastern Europe. A missionary camp in South Africa. I met people who had never heard the gospel, and others who had heard it their whole lives but never believed it mattered. But when I told them what I'd seen, how Jesus looked at me, how he wept over the lost, how he longed for hearts, not habits, I watched people break. Not from guilt but from love. From the weight of truth. Souls returned to him. Some for the first time. Others after decades away. But the vision that changed me most came in the quiet. I was in a chapel in Spain, alone at night, fasting and praying. A single candle flickered before the crucifix. And as I whispered the name, Yeshua, I was taken into another vision. I saw a vast valley stretching endlessly in every direction, filled with people. Millions, maybe billions. All standing still, looking upward, waiting. Their eyes were filled with longing. Some with fear. Some with desperation. They weren't angry. They were lost. And Jesus' voice came again, stronger than before. "These are the ones who do not know me. They are waiting. But my people are asleep." I fell to my knees and wept. "Lord, what can I do?" Yes. And his answer shook my soul. "Go wake them." From that day on, I've never been the same. I don't care who believes me or who doubts. I don't need titles or approval. He died. I saw the King. I was sent back to speak. And that's exactly what I'll do until my last breath. If you're listening to this and you've been running from God, or maybe you've just been drifting without even realizing it, this is your moment. You're not promised tomorrow. But right now you can choose him. Not religion. Not performance. Just Jesus. Call out to him. To his name. Ask him to show you who he really is. Because he's waiting. And I'm telling you, he's real. And he's coming. If this story stirred something in your heart, please don't scroll away. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more testimonies like this. Someone you know might be one click away from hearing exactly what they need. Jesus is calling. Don't ignore him.